Good afternoon, folks. Welcome. So nice to see students, members of the community. We have a number of people that are going to join us on live stream today, so that's fantastic. So thanks for coming out. For those people who don't know me, my name is Jeff Payne. I'm the Interim Vice President of Research and Graduate Programs here at UMBC. And as we've been talking about for the last number of months, the importance of the library in a research university and continuing to showcase the opportunities that the library can provide in terms of being a resource. We have the archives, we have the research data center in there now. So the library is an important fabric of the institution, as well as, you can't hear me? Sorry, wow. I've never had that. As I said, the library is an important fabric of a research intensive university. As we've been supporting in collaboration with the archives this year, the Archival Connection Speaker Series that demonstrates the diverse areas of research and activity happening in the region and throughout the province. We've had 3 speakers to date, Dr. Jonathan Swanger, Dr. Dominic Clement, and Dr. Jonathan Payton. And what was really nice about those 3 presentations was, again, the breadth and diversity of the research, but the utilization of the archives is an important aspect of a resource in conducting their research. At our last presentation, we were able to announce the first ever graduate scholarship in archival research. So we hope that's been launched now, that we'll have a number of students that will want to put their names forward and show that that continue to work and in their academic research sort of activities that utilizes archives is an important aspect. So, as I said, welcome to the final Archival Connection Speaker Series today. It's been a great, as I said, 4 already, and looking forward to Dr. Halseth today. So today's presentation will be about 45 minutes in length, and then we'll have about 10 to 50 minutes for questions after. Marlene Morris will moderate the questions. And for those that are on live stream, you can send your questions by email directly to archives@umbc.ca or by text at the number 250-999-0478. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Halseth.
Those comments. For a very long time, it's been my view and position that you can't really understand where you are, certainly can't understand where you're going, without figuring out where you've been. The trajectories of the past have a great deal of impact and implication for us. And so all of my work is grounded in a historical base. I'm pleased then to be able to support the archives with this presentation. The previous 3 presentations were absolutely fantastic, so I'm here to lower the expectations for next year. What I'd like to do are twofold. One, share some issues about the archives, the opportunities of archival research. And the second thing is offer what I might think of as a bit of a research love letter to the region. It's been my great honor and great privilege to meet the people and visit so many of the communities of the Upper Fraser, and they are without question generous and giving. They love their communities, and we'll see some of that evidence in a couple of minutes. So a little bit of fun and a little bit of advertising for the archives. Hopefully we'll be able to get through it quickly. I'll be keeping my eye on Marlene because I'm a terrible storyteller. I'll tell a million stories. We'll be here for a week. I can stay that long. I'm sure most of you don't wish to. What I'd like to do is set a bit of a background for how we came to doing this project, and then move through some opportunities that archival research gives us to tell stories. And I'll move through some of the different sources of information that we use, and then wrap up from there. So to start, it's been my privilege to raise my children in the territory of the Clay-Letonais. My children came to experience a region that was beautiful, clean, wild, and a wonderful place to grow up in. And in my work, I hope that in a small way every day, I steward the land a little bit forward as Clately elders have since time immemorial stewarded the land forward. With that introduction, there's really not too much material in the presentation on First Nations history in the Upper Fraser region. As yet, the UNBC Archives has some good but limited holdings on those topics, some things that Kent Sedgwick and the Taylor Baxter family donated, as well as some archival video that Rob Van Adricum shot at different times over the years. But the Clately have an agreement with the Exploration Place, and so their records are safe, and they will be able to work with those in the future. I'd also like to make a bit of a dedication to some of the people I've had a chance to cross paths with. Marilyn Wheeler, always a wonderful person to touch base with. I remember the last time I chatted with her and her son Matthew up in McBride. Bob Harkins, a big supporter of our work in the early years, and of course the Penny for Your Thoughts book coming out of the dynamic work that he did. Jack Boudreau I never really met, but I've read all of his books and was quite saddened at his passing just a short time ago. Kent Sedgwick I did know very well. We worked with Kent many years. We spent many hours in the Upper Fraser area. A wonderful friend, a great researcher, and a big friend of the local history association. And then John Trick, a fellow, you'll see some of John's work coming up again. John and I shared many jokes and times about his time in the Upper Fraser. Two fellows who spent a lot of time with my students, Erwin Stoll and Terry Bromeland, both lots of experience in the area. Erwin, of course, purchased the St. Clair Mills town site, and Terry's grandfather came in on the Grand Trunk in 1914. As Terry likes to say, he's closed every sawmill he's ever worked in, and so he knows an awful lot about the region. Thanks as well to the members of my Upper Fraser Historical Geography Project team. We started it with Gail and Tracy and Aileen Espiritu. Aileen's now gone to Norway, but Gail and Tracy are still here, and all the many students and community people who over the years have helped out on the project. So in 1994, a brash new university was founded in northern BC, and it opened its doors and had its first semester, and a bunch of completely clueless faculty members like myself wandered in the doors. Being given the original calendar for the university, I, along with Gail Fondle, was asked to teach the geography of British Columbia. We came north with no material on northern BC in our back pocket, so we turned to great sources such as Al Farley's wonderful Atlas of British Columbia. We mined it extensively for our early lectures before we knew the region. And as you would put together a forestry lecture, you pull out the forestry maps. And we had this fabulous map from 1931. And it's a map that makes some sense to me. If you look down here, Metro Vancouver, port and rail connections, lots of activity, lots of sawmills. Sawmills through the Kootenays also made sense to me. Mining industry is a huge consumer of wood, especially underground. And then there was this. What is going on up there? What is this dense cluster of sawmills? Well, of course, our curiosity got the better of us, and the next thing you know, we're off on a project to work with communities and talk with people to understand the Upper Fraser. And that took us on a many-year journey to try to pull together information, help people share stories of the magnificent transitions that occurred all along this region. And one of the things that was important in doing that work is that we soon found that all of the major public policy changes that British Columbia has attempted over the last 120 years have been experienced in this valley. And fabulously, right in the middle of it, well, not quite geographically in the middle of it, is the Eliza Lake Research Forest. So not only do we have a valley where all of these policy changes were experienced, but we have a research station that has looked at the environmental and forest and other issues in that valley as well. So it made a fabulous place for a bunch of neophyte researchers to do some work. And I mean, truly, who wouldn't want to work in the Upper Fraser region? It's absolutely fabulous, beautiful vistas, wonderful communities to be in. You get to go to really cool places, such as Kevin Dunphy's store in Willow River, which is itself a timepiece of heritage and activities. You can see things going back in time. You have to visit and you have to walk around the Willow River store. It's got the post office, the liquor store. There's a VHS collection in the back that you can still rent, and then other things. Now, most research sometimes can feel like it takes you to hell and back. It's so difficult. But working in the Upper Fraser is really like going out to the Paradise Cafe, adjacent to the Upper Fraser Mill. This is a group of students that we had out there. But when you take social science researchers out to the field, you have to be very careful, because just when you're expecting them to do useful things and help out, they turn to the philosophical, the conceptual, and they really wonder about the tools that are required for the jobs of achieving change. So with that introduction, I'd like to move on with getting to know the region. And one of the best ways to get to know any region is to listen to the people who've lived there, the people who've created their lives there, love that region, and love to share its story and its history. Arrayed at the front, for those of you who are online, are a whole series of books about the region. We have some of the authors of those books and contributors to those books in the audience with us here in Prince George. Whoops, like that picture too much. So you can get a hold of these stories where people have put together the tales of growing up. In this case, MacArthur's book on Eliza Lake, a wonderful read. Just let me go back to that one. If you're from the Upper Fraser, you know why the cover picture is of a baseball team. The old mills and the towns had a very competitive baseball schedule, and Terry has lots of stories about some of the different mill owners in his area that he worked for, actually hiring crews of push broom operators who didn't know the right end of a push broom from the wrong end of a push broom, but boy, were they good baseball players. And so a little bit of prioritizing with the hiring there. Waleski's story about Willow River. And then, of course, a book that really changed things around with Bob Harkins leading the charge. The community of Penny came together with an absolutely fabulous book, Penny for Your Thoughts. That was followed, not followed sequentially, but there's also Marilyn Wheeler's two books, her earlier version and her later version on the Robson Valley story. The 2008 version is just a gorgeous book. I have a copy of it off to the side if you want to see the quality of those photos, and the wonder of the story is really terrific. The Yellowhead Pass book by the Valemount Historical Society. And then the industry that became Jack Boudreau Publishing started with this book, an absolutely fabulous book on some of the amazing characters in the history of the Upper Fraser region. Soon followed in short order by a whole series of books on the paddle wheelers and the river rats. I have some great photos of Ray Mueller going through the canyon in his riverboat, and he had this hat that looks like it should be on a street corner gentleman in Vancouver as he's shooting the rapids. And I've been told by his family he never lost his hat. Grizzly Bear Mountain, of course, an awful lot about grizzly bear hunting. Campfires and Memories, of course, another wonderful Jack Boudreau book. He has numbers of books about other regions in BC as well, but these ones are the specific Upper Fraser ones. Lloyd Jeck's In the Shadow of the Peak, so a little bit further up the valley towards the McBride area, back to Crescent Spur. And then we have Clarence and Olga Boudreau with us today, and of course their Mists of Time book, a beautiful story about Guilford and Lindup, the Fortons Mill, that sort of thing. There's a copy at the front. Wilf Lebo's book, His Little Boy from Lewes, a wonderful story of immigration and migration. And then Ray Olson's more recent book on the Upper Fraser area, Lebo to Lewes. A beautiful book, wonderfully written, well-researched, and I understand that Ray has been working on some additional books, so more to come out on that, hopefully. The Upper Fraser has also been the setting for some fiction works. This is a book we used to have students read in the Geography of BC book, a beautiful work of fiction right from the Tijon area. And then Roy Sinclair's Paper Trees, which is ostensibly a work of fiction. Its critique of public policy around forest harvesting is maybe awfully close to a biting satire at times. So that's one. And then, of course, academic publications. Frank Leonard's wonderful book on the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway, the kickstart to all the changes that we see in the Upper Fraser. And Gordon Hack's Capital and Labor book, really talking about labor organizing in this area. Lots of tales then about the contest of power in the early years between capital and labor in an evolving and transforming forestry landscape. And then community groups have also come together around special purpose activities. I like this handout. It's a look at the postmasters and postal delivery in the Upper Fraser region. I like it because the cover picture to me conveys so much of what the Upper Fraser was prior to about the 1970s. The railway line was the lifeblood to everything. And here we have a young girl posting a letter into a railway car as it had stopped at her station. What was beautiful about this, of course, it involves so many of the people who've dedicated themselves to sharing the history and story of the Upper Fraser region. Erwin Stoll's in there, Marilyn's in there, Kent Cedric's in there, and also Trell Morrow. I have a couple of Trell's books here as well. It's a very good and detailed book, highlighting all of the different postal outlets where they wrote up a history. Each one comes with a picture of where the post office was. In this case, the railway station in Dunster. A little write-up on the post office itself, and then a summary of all the postmasters who had served in that capacity. So again, a wonderful memory, a wonderful record, and a wonderful way to communicate the life and livelihood that was the valley. So those were elements where we could read and we could learn about what the communities and the people were sharing about their lives and their places. But archives and archival research provides a whole series of opportunities to pursue other research. And I want to explore a couple of those types of data or types of information that we might learn from. So I want to start right now with photographs. And in the construction of the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway, one of the really neat things about the railway company is that they were masters of prefabrication. All of their bridges, much of their equipment, and their railway stations were all designed and then prefabbed back east and shipped out to the railhead where they were assembled. And it required planning. They had to think ahead. Will this stop be a big stop, a little stop, or a whistle stop? And send the right size station to those communities. So here in Giscombe, we can see it was dreamed of by the Grand Trunk Pacific in 1910 to 1912 as a medium-size community along the railway line, so it got the medium-size railway station. Dunster got exactly the same railway station, as it was projected to be a medium-sized place along the Grand Trunk's new line. The rapid advance is ruining all my punchlines. It moves too fast for me. McBride, on the other hand, was going to be a major divisional point. As a large area just outside of the Rocky Mountains, it was going to be where the trains were assembled and disassembled for preparation for going through the mountain pass. It had a large turntable and sheds for the locomotives to add on to trains going through the mountains. And it was a sorting yard. And you can see here they got the large station that was prefab back east and sent out. And lovingly, the community of McBride has taken care of that train station, and it remains a beautiful piece of the community. It houses an art gallery, the tourist information office, and at this end of it, the Beanery Cafe. restarted a number of years ago as a celebration of the Beanery Cafe that was in there during the Depression to provide affordable meals for people moving along the railway line. So now we'll move into some of Ivan Anderson's collection of photos that he donated to the Exploration Place. We've been privileged enough to gain access to those and use them in the Upper Fraser work. If you want to find out about more about them, the Exploration Place has that information. And archivists have a kind of a love-hate relationship with photographs. Photographs like this are fabulous. I mean, who wouldn't want to get to know the guy in the front row with the big round hat? I mean, he just looks like he has interesting stories to tell. But a photograph, if it comes with no information, can just leave you dead-ended. In this case, talking with many folks, we're able to find that this was a Sinclair Mills bush camp crew working to cut. Not too many photographs come like this, pre-labeled and all ready to go. Some of you will no doubt recognize people, but also recognize families in Prince George. Other times you have to look for clues on the photographs. In this case, who the photographer might be. Do they still have an office? Did they donate their negatives collection anywhere where you might be able to track down evidence on what the photograph is about? Or in other cases, you can prepare a slide collection of images that interest you and take them out to communities. This is one of my favorite pictures for that reason. We were out in a small community, in the community hall. There were 3 older women sitting together looking at the pictures. This picture pops up on the screen. The 2 women on the outside turn to the woman in the middle and are staring at her for a moment or two. One of them taps her on the shoulder and says, "Hey, that's you there. That's you in your old coat." The woman in the middle pauses for a second and sort of leans forward and says, "I did have a coat like that once." So you never can tell how you're going to find information out about places and people. In this case, this is the McGregor camp, and I don't know the gentleman in the picture except for Ray Hatch, the logging superintendent in the middle. I know him from other circumstances, but if I didn't know him, again, this is back to the archivists have a love-hate relationship with photographs. Looks great, but if we don't know them and even might not know where it is, it doesn't help us too much. But photographs can let you search out and explore changing issues and topics. Transportation in the woods. I love this picture, partly because I love horses. But this is a horse logging railway, only the rail lines are stringers of logs. And the cart is moved along using a big hub that travels along that stringer of logs. Much easier in the Upper Fraser to move logs in the wintertime. This is why through most of its early history up until the 1960s, it was mostly winter logging. In this case, we have a team of horses and a sledge loaded with logs. This is at Sinclair Mills. They've come along an ice road, relatively easy for the horses to pull the load on, especially considering that in the summertime, much of the area is pretty swampy. And they're going to offload into the river because, of course, the mill is set up with the jack ladder going into the river to bring the logs into the mill. So even though it's wintertime, there's a battle on to keep the river open enough that you can pull the logs down and pull them into the mill. A little while later, of course, trucks came into the picture. And one of the critical transitions we don't often think about is the accidents of history. And in this case, thinking about the connection between the Upper Fraser region and the Alaska Highway. In the Second World War, the U.S. military spent a small fortune bringing mountains of heavy equipment up to build and maintain the Alaska Highway. They weren't going to pay a nickel to take it back, so it was all up there. And so logging operators and contractors and mill owners from the Upper Fraser went up and cannibalized a lot of that heavy equipment and brought it back to the air. And it was really the first significant transformation of industrial production. In this case, because we've talked with lots of people, we know that this is a Sinclair Mills truck on a plank road. They're at a passing lane. You can just see the tail end of the truck he's passing, the unloaded truck as he's heading down. A better picture of a Sinclair Mills truck, a beautiful picture of a plank road, and you can see the construction of that road in this picture. John Trick, who I mentioned earlier, was a fantastic draftsman, and among the many things he did was create for us drawings of technologies lost to time. And in this case, he drew a schematic of how you built a plank road. And although you can see some logs there for supports, let me guarantee you that it goes another 2 layers of logs deeper. You had swampy ground, and it was quite a construction process. And then, of course, to put the deck on that plank road, you needed rough-cut planks, and you used a portable sawmill, dragged along to wherever you need it. I can't help but look at that picture now and think only, what would WorkSafe BC think if they wandered into a work site and this was it? A honking giant saw blade spinning around madly and a bunch of guys shoving logs through it and pulling off these rough-cut planks. You can also find out about some of the more curious things humans have tried in their... Oh, that's the next one. You can look at the impacts of technology change on labor. So here we are loading up a cart with a team of horses in front. They're going to pull it along a stringer, a road, or railway of logs. Now, if you see a logging truck today with its bunks up on the side and a bundle of logs on, you'll see a cable that wraps all the way around the logs. Well, I thought that's what these guys were doing until guys who did this job showed me what they do. They actually had the platform here. Then they do a small load of logs on the one side and a small load of logs on the other. Throw a chain up over that first load, down the back side of that load, hanging loose in the middle, up over the logs on the far side, and down again to secure it. And then they would load onto the middle a bunch of extra logs. And it was the weight of those logs in the middle that held the sides of that load together. So it was an ingenious solution to the problem of loading logs and then having horses drag them along a railway line out to the mill. Now there are seven people in this picture loading a Sinclair Mills truck. There's one guy in that picture loading a Sinclair Mills truck. So again, impacts of technology on employment in the forest industry as we moved through time. Now here's the punchline I've already given away about some of the curiosities of humanity. I give you the tree scissors. Tried, not very successful, huge amount of damage to the wood, but I've got a picture of it, so I thought I'd share it with you. We can also look at technology in the mills. I put this one in for personal reasons. These are the drying, the pathway from the green chain out to the drying racks. And in this case, we have horses, Sinclair Mills, taking the wood out from the sawmill out to the stacks where the wood would be dried. Again, John Trick did a beautiful diagram of the technology lost in stacking lumber. In this case, each layer above the previous layer needs to extend a little bit beyond the previous layer in order to shelter it from the weather. And then you cover the top. You need to put in extended planks for the crew that's stacking it to move up onto the top as they assemble it, and then for disassembling it down. We have horses, soon replaced by jury-rigged jitneys, dragging the lumber out to the drying yards, and then forklifts. And I put those sequence in because my father worked for BC Conveying Machinery in Vancouver, and he knew every sawmill up in this area when I asked him about it later, because his company sold a lot of those forklifts and then later lumber carriers to those mills. So it's kind of a personal connection to that story that I didn't even know that I had growing up. So can also tell us a little bit about places as they change over time. One of my favorite pictures of the big Northwood mill at Upper Fraser. This is the mill in full operation here. The log yards getting ready to go there. The Paradise Cafe we saw earlier is right there. The town site is here. We'll see some pictures in a few minutes of the management houses along the back end here. The middle part, trailer park. Just hidden in behind here is the elementary school. So amazing, amazing town site when it was in operation. After it closed, of course, you could go out and have a look at the remnants. I like this picture. It's the safety picture. Here we have the can for replacement ownership sign fallen off the beautiful Northwood sign underneath. It didn't exist for very long, but I managed to catch a picture of it, the community's expression for what had been done to their beloved sawmill. And then in places like the Upper Fraser, you can see these beautiful relics of time, of history, of the past, sentinels of industry fading gracefully into the ground. What's often missed is why beehive burners were built in the first place. When I moved to Prince George, and for about the decade after I moved here, there's a great deal of debate about closing beehive burners. As environmental protection efforts around air quality, closing beehive burners were seen as an important public policy move. What's missing is the fact that these beautiful beasts were in fact one of British Columbia's first environmental protection regulations. Prior to this, especially in circumstances like this, wood waste was simply pushed into the Fraser River. And that was not at all good for the river, the fish, and the ecosystem. So high temperature burning with relatively little waste in comparison dispersed in the air was seen as a first step towards environmental protection in British Columbia. So their time has come, their time has passed, and they age gracefully. But again, someone like John Trick can share with us these messages of technologies lost with the different types of beehive burners that were in the Upper Fraser, how they functioned, which ones were more efficient. And I love this picture. It's of the conveyor belt going in, an end shot and a vertical shot showing the chain and the flutes that drag the waste up to the burner. So with photographs, we can see an awful lot about what's happened over time, especially where we can take pictures from the same place. But newspapers also provide a beautiful archival location for research. When we first started our research, of course, you had to search out newspaper information on microfilm, microfiche, and if it was good, you printed it. They were really lousy printouts, and you had to try to work with that. Fabulously now for researchers, the microfilm or the historical newspapers such as the Prince George Citizen are all digitized, much easier to search, much cleaner. And with newspapers, you can really track the ebb and flow, the pulse of the communities and the regions. In this case, the announcement that change was on the horizon. The Grand Trunk Pacific is going to be arriving soon. A newspaper on November 23rd, 2012. We can also see the rise of new industry. Here, from April 1950, Eagle Lake Sawmills, what was to become during its lifetime the largest sawmill in the British Empire, began operations. And we can follow the trials and tribulations of the Eagle Lake Sawmills, such as in 1955 when there was a wildcat strike and walkout. We can find the issues in labor, we can find the issues in management, and track them through newspapers. They're fabulous windows, and then sadly, they can also tell us when the time for that activity or that industry or that plant may have come to a close. And in this case, the announcement in 1975 that the prideful sawmill at Giscombe was going to be auctioned off. One of the other fabulous things that you can find in the newspapers are the community columns. And the Prince George newspaper contained many community columns. And you'd find things like the the PTA meetings, family picnics, who was visiting who had relatives in from abroad. You can also find concerns, such as when polio reared its head in the valley, and then all of these subsequent public health activities to contain the polio outbreak. You can follow through with debates of the day, the hysteria in 1944 about the Japanese threat on the West Coast, and at length the treatment of the problems that could arise from clustering Japanese Canadians in internment camps just up the valley and around the corner from places like Penny, where they might become more Japanese than Canadian. But that's a story that goes away, and then down near the bottom there's something just funny in that art, in that story from the community. A baby boy is born. And for those of you who have a deep and long history with UNBC or the forest industry in the region, you'll know and remember Dan Luzier. So here we are, the announcement of Dan's birth, and their move up, mums and sons move up to the McBride Hospital. And you know, you can even follow Dan's life through the newspapers up there, because a few years later, 1951, again, a community column, again, there's a picnic and the PTA award, in this case, for community gardens, vegetable gardens. Little Danny Luzier won the best garden prize. So it's big stories and little stories are contained in the newspapers. Another source of information you can turn to are government records. I've got some samples up at the front here. Things like corporate reports, ministry reports, ministry records, annual reports, Company Act filings. All of these things can contain industry on production, labor, operations, ownership, all sorts of fabulous information that if you have a huge amount of time, you can put into databases about companies and their operations, and from that create stories. And this is a body of work that Brian Stauffer created from databases that he created out of evidence from Victoria. We'll dig into this beautiful poster in a second. The map shows individual companies that had operated at each of these locations over time. So in Eliza Lake, all of these dots represent the names of different companies that had operated there. Didn't necessarily mean there was a different mill. It could have been just a new owner and a new name. And I cut out this part as my thank you to John Trick. John and I had a running joke in all of the government records and all of the private sector directories. The Trick mills, the two mills, the Trick and Gale mill and then the SB Trick mill, are always listed at being at Eliza Lake. And I'd say to John on 3 occasions, John, did you like living out there when the mill was at Eliza Lake? And he'd go, the post office was in Eliza Lake, the mill was at Hansard Lake. So when we made the map, I made darn sure for John that we put the 2 Trick mills at Hansard Lake and not at Eliza Lake, like the data tells us, but the man whose father ran it knew otherwise. So we can also look at data on numbers of mills operating. We see here from its founding, not long after the Grand Trunk opened, a low number of mills operating until the Second World War. But as we come out of the Second World War, tremendous increase in the number of mills operating. A few things playing into that. First of all, during the Second World War, the wood in this region, particularly the spruce, was considered a vital war product, a war material. Although the Spitfire gets all the accolades for winning the Battle of Britain, it was really the, where have I got the things here? It was really the Hawker Hurricane with a large number of wooden components, and the most successful fighter bomber for the British in the Second World War, the de Havilland Mosquito, was almost entirely built of wood. A huge amount of that was spruce. We have the post-World War II suburban boom in the United States and the tremendous upswing in the demand for lumber. So a huge growth And then over time, the number of mills declining as we moved into the 60s and the first half of the 70s, with the big mills at Penny, Sinclair Mills, and those sorts of places. And then in the 70s and into the 80s with Northwood and the big mill at Upper Fraser really dominating area of production. We can look at production at those mills, and we see a story that continues today. Relatively stable levels of production over time until we come to the really big mill, new mill being put in by Northwood. And then we see equipment increasing capacity, so output increasing exceptionally rapidly. And that story's continued today. The super mills, of course, today are producing far more than even per day than these mills even could have imagined. But a story that's not continued from this past are the changes in employment. Historically, relatively low, moving into the high employment in the big mills in the Upper Fraser. But today, that story's ended because the super mills with their computer-managed production equipment have very, very few employees comparatively. So some stories from the Upper Fraser continue, some stories don't continue. We can also look at change over time through maps. If the maps don't tell the story by themselves. 1920, 11 mills in place, come into the beginning of the Depression. We had 16 mills operating all along the line, clustered a little bit. In 1940, again, 13 mills still operating. Not a significant drop from the earlier period, partly because of a circumstance of ownership. Many of these surviving mills through the Depression were owned by prairie grain elevator companies. And they maintained the mills in order to maintain their key workforce. A workforce that worked in the summer on the farms and then came by rail and worked in the winter harvesting in the woods in this region. So a real ongoing and continuing tie. In the 1950s, that boom, we're starting to take advantage now of upswings in markets. 1960, 51 mills operating. This is the peak for the Upper Fraser region. Come into 1970, 35 mills. Now we have change in public policy. We have very active desire to bring in big tree farms, big mills, competitive globally, higher levels of production, and for the government, higher levels of certain revenue from stumpage revenue, employment revenue, taxation, corporate taxation, etc. And as that new model settles in place, the small mills fade away, and we have a couple of the big mills left, especially in this case, the big mill at Upper Fraser. So the last source I want to share with you for people interested in archival research are oral histories. People sharing the stories of their lives so that others can learn from them. And what I want to highlight here is some work that a master's student of mine, Kyle Kusch, did with oral history data, trying to work with what people were talking in terms of the communities and tie those to what we knew from the government evidence. So in this case, through the 1950s and 1960s, we can see the big mills at Penny, Sinclair Mills, around Upper Fraser and area, and Giscombe. Move into the 1960s, those stay in place. Then a change. Watch up here as we move into the 1970s. So the mills closing, the big mill opening and operating, and then the population now living at McGregor Camp, working the big tree farm license that Northwood had. Kyle also tied his mapping and stories into company consolidation. In this case, the mill at Giscombe, the Eagle Lake Sawmills, acquiring the assets of the mills at Eliza Lake, and then later acquiring the assets of the Penny Mill. Whoops. And then Sinclair Mills and Eliza Lake being consolidated, their production consolidated into the big mill at Upper Fraser. And then later, when Upper Fraser closed, that production consolidated back into town here at the Prince George sawmill. We could trace a decline through people's stories, the evidence in the government records, and Kyle's mapping to efficiencies in local mills, but also to sawmill consolidation and closure. The tie between local jobs and people living in communities was very clear. We can also look, as Kyle did, with commuter patterns. So early on in the 1940s and 1970s, that big world-scale mill of Eagle Lake Sawmills in Giscombe was attracting workers in from neighboring communities. Good place to work, lots of jobs. From the 1960s to the 1990s, it was the big mill at Upper Fraser, attracting people all in from the Upper Fraser region to work there. And then with the introduction of a bus shuttle from Prince George, many of the workers in the Upper Fraser mill didn't live in the town site or didn't live in the communities, but lived in Prince George and came out on the bus. And then, of course, with its closure, the remaining population in the region commuting back to the mill in Prince George. When people move, they move to create a better life for their children. When they move long distance, they often engage in what's called chain migration. So if we know someone from our area who's gone away, found a good place with good jobs, they'll write back and say, why don't you come? This is good, and we'll go there too. And you have people from the same areas, regions, communities, villages, often going to the same destinations far away. So Kyle also asked people about the ethnic and resident origins of people in the area. And so if we look through the 1960s, in that time which was the sort of the salad days of the big mills in the small towns, we see that in most of these communities there are a large number of residents who've come from the prairie provinces. A settling down of the tie that goes back much earlier when people commuted from the prairies to these regions to work. We also see people from other areas in Canada. We see people from the Scandinavian and Nordic countries, this bright yellow in there, and then other Eastern European, Southern European, and others. The Southern European one is particularly big. Here's one in Giscombe, the well-known Portuguese population in Giscombe. Then when Giscombe was closed, moved to Prince George. So the origins of that wonderful Portuguese community. One of our students, John Sardina, from that Portuguese community, I'm very proud to say one of our earliest students here who went on to earn not just a master's degree but also a PhD degree, and he's now a professor of geography in England. He taught in Portugal for a while, and now he's in England. Also, through that 1960s period, lots of people with visible minority populations from all over the world. These were dynamic and robust and diverse communities, people coming for the work, coming for the opportunity. Sometimes the tales are tied to something specific that happened where they're from, that they might look to move, be a push factor. In other cases, the pull factor of good jobs, long-lasting in these cases, where you could come with only a strong desire to work hard and get a well-paying job. So when we look at that diversity, Kyle's work reflecting on what people said was that people were coming from all over the world to take up these new opportunities for a new life. And this thing is just crazy. So to finish, before the slideshow finishes for me, there are many, many more opportunities to tell stories from archival work. Here at UNBC, they've organized the archival holdings across a whole number of easily searchable topic areas, from natural resources to development and transportation, environmental, political, social, histories, all helps make those collections more searchable, readily accessible. If you have questions, you can explore those here. Ray Olson, we highlighted his book as one of the more recent ones, spent a lot of time up at UNBC with our stuff and with the archives gathering information. Some of the significant collections I'd just like to highlight for the Upper Fraser. Interior University, of course, the Prince George Oral History Group, Ray Williston's body of work. I had the privilege of interviewing Ray Williston for his oral history. We have over 80 oral histories done for this project. Horst played quite a role in having Adam Zimmerman donate his papers here. I'm hoping one day I'll type in the Horst Sanders paper in there. I'm looking at make sure that happens. Kent Sedgwick before he passed away, and as I said earlier, the various First Nations groups have placed their records in holding at some of the archives in northern BC, including ours. And as Jeff mentioned at the beginning, there is terrific support for archival research, not just the digital collection that Kim has been working on and makes things fabulously easy to research, not like 20 years ago when we started, but also these wonderful new Archives graduate research scholarships to support students in working with this information. So I'm closing with my favorite picture. Hopefully it will stay. It will not stay. It will run away. It's my favorite picture from the Upper Fraser, the Sinclair Mill sawmill in its prime. Thank you. Thank you for your time. It was my pleasure. Now the picture's going to stay up.
All right, so now's our chance to ask questions and have a little bit of discussion. For people here in the audience, because we've got some people on at remote sites, we have to use the microphone. And so if you just raise your hand, if you've got a comment, a question you'd like to add to the dialogue, I'll come up and bring the microphone to you. And we'll also hear if we've got any remote questions. So who would like to start? Perfect.
A couple slides back, there was a link to the online archives. Could you bring that back so that we could record that? And could you talk a little bit about that and what's online for us to see?
This one?
Yes.
Yeah, actually,
Thank
the
you.
best person, we have her here, is the woman creating that digital archive. Kim, do you want to just let people know they're
Kim, hang on, I'm bringing the microphone to you. That takes away all my exercise.
So it was a 2-year project to digitize the most significant holdings we have in special collections. Right now it's mainly published material, and it consists of books, maps, and newspapers that all relate to the various regions of northern BC. So that's Williams Lake, north to the border, east to the border, and Haida Gwaii.
So everyone's copying that down right now, or taking photographs of it. Other questions or memories to add to Greg's presentation? We've got, good, Mike. Mike, who is the head of the Eliza Lake Research Forest. Here you are.
I guess one question, Greg, is if you could identify one or two spots in the historical record that you'd really like to know more about. You think maybe the history is out there somewhere. What would they be?
Yeah, great question, Mike. One of the points in time that I think would be really terrific pursuing further would be that decade to 15-year transition when Northwood came into the region. The dynamism of change at that time, of course, is a fabulous story. But the story that I'd really be interested in below that dynamism of change was the persistence of so many small sawmill operations. What people have been telling me is that they were able to operate successfully because they knew the land, they knew their mills, they knew their markets, they were real experts. And while they might not have had the economic efficiencies of the big new player on the block, they could outcompete them for at least a period of time while Northwood came to know its own operations and its own activities on the land. That just strikes me as a fabulous story about how knowledge of place and operation can carry you, even though it might look like an unfair battle between industrial titan and small operator. That's one in that story. But that transition in time was really a marker for all of northern BC, and so telling it in this valley would be a fabulous point to focus upon.
Other questions? Oh, good. Okay. You didn't let me get down to the bottom first.
Greg, thanks so much. One thing that has struck me over the course of the 4 presentations is in going to the archives that although they're static in time, there is such an emotional connection to the stories, and you know, you talk about the pictures and having them talk to you and things like that. Can you talk a bit about what it's like emotionally to go through these types of histories and that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. I started my presentation by saying this is going to be an advertisement for archives, but personally for me, I think it's my love letter, my research love letter back to the communities. When you read the newspapers, you know a guy like Dan Luzier, and you know how much he loved the region, you know what a great guy he was, you know his life ended early, and you see when he was born or when he won and there's lots of other stories of little Danny Luzier that run through there. You read stories about people in communities confronting real hardship, but also celebrating joyful things. We've got lots of stories in the oral histories of Friday night dances along the East Line, and up until a certain point when the train from Prince George arrived, it was a family dance night. The train, euphemistically called the booze train, arrived, and then it was time for the kids to go home, and the adults had their party for the rest of the night. Church services scheduled so that the ministers could travel along the train to go to some of the different services and churches. Hosting a static display of photos in a small community and seeing an older woman and her daughter poring over a little tiny photo, and you go up and chat with them, and what was happening was the woman was showing the daughter where she was married. The church doesn't exist anymore, so they were reliving this. I mean, all of those things, they reach into your heart, and they really imprint place and people and family and community. My work day to day is on community change, and following and reading these stories, and it looks black and white on the paper, but boy, it becomes part of your soul. And you feel the rhythm of life, right? You feel the daily activities. Ray Williston had a funny, his annual story, as he liked to say, was at that time, when he was still a school superintendent, school teachers had to be unmarried. I don't know why, but that was the policy at the time. So you can imagine there's a Sunday afternoon train from Prince George going up the Upper Fraser in September, and a third of the train is young unmarried women coming to teach at the small schools one at a time, and the rest of the train is loaded with single young men in town for the weekend break from logging or working in the mill. Well, as Ray put it, Yeah, every year, that whole group of young ladies and young men, I'd have to replace all the unmarried women the next year because they got married off. That's just a, a wonderful story then that leads into what you're reading in the newspapers about families and children. And then gut-wrenching stories about people who love their community. But what happens when the school closes? What happens when the oldest child in the house has to go to the high school in Prince George, which for a time was a dormitory high school? Does the mill worker commute, or does the high school kid commute? Well, you're damn right the mill worker commutes, because the family decides we're not putting our child through that. So really tough decisions about staying or leaving communities, what's best for the family, what's best for the children. These things are amazing and they're powerful. It's a terrific work. And I certainly, anyone who's thinking about doing research work, this is a region for it. The background material is fabulous. The people who've lived their full lives over the full lives of the communities, they're here with us today.
So just as a follow-up point to the Northern BC collection, so we're doing a second follow-up project focusing on digitizing forest history resources in Northern BC. So if any of you have material that would be relevant to such a project, please do get in touch with us at archives@unbc.ca or come talk to us, because there is an acquisitions component of the project, and we would love to preserve more of our local history.
And also, I just wanted to note that many of the oral histories that Greg is referring to are going to be digitized, and that's our plan, to have them accessible over time for those people who did consent to that. So I think, to answer also partially your question, Jeff, the beauty of audio is that it can reveal some of that emotion as well. And so that's what you don't see in the newspapers necessarily. So we're really looking forward to that part of the project as well. I just have a quick question for you, Greg, regarding the First Nations involvement in forestry. And I did see a reference to that there. How would a student be able to find out more about that? Because that, to me, is new. I did not know that there were First Nations people who were employed in forestry.
Yeah, sure.
So is it through the oral histories?
Yeah, it's just a question of time and being able to do it. There's so many stories to be opened up. So in that case, simply starting off by talking to some people, getting some connections, finding out folks, then talking to those folks, seeing if they'd be interested in doing oral histories, sharing information, sharing recollections. We've had folks after their oral histories load us all up in a car and drive out, and they'd show us things on the ground. John Trick popped out of the truck one day and dragged us off into the woods, and in the middle of nowhere, in what I thought was the woods, he kicks a bunch of moss aside, and there's the remnants of an old plank road. There's mountains of nails and things. So whatever the topic, First Nations participation, how it was that communities functioned, and the social and cultural other events, easy to break in. It still have lots of folks here who can be introduced to and then share their stories with.
Any other questions? Yes. We have so many people, as Greg said, who have actually lived through this and written the books, and so please, if you feel like sharing your memories, it would be terrific too.
A couple of questions. First off, what is the status of the oral history program right now? I think that was an excellent project, but my sense is that it's kind of wound down. And the second question is, you indicated you weren't covering the First Nations history prior to this, but I see in one of your later slides that you did indicate First Nations as a minority. Do you have any knowledge of First Nations during this period in these communities?
Yeah, two great questions, Mike. On the first one, yeah, the oral history project has wound down. It wound down a number of years ago. We have just, within the past year, moved all of our tapes and transcripts and records over, and electronic files over, to the archives, so that now they'll be safely and carefully preserved. They're going into the electronic collection that Kim was mentioning. So that part on our side of the house, that doesn't preclude anyone from starting up another round of oral history work, be it for an individual project or a larger undertaking. So it's always a possibility. And our First Nations information within this project is very limited, is very thin. Going back to the other Mike, Joel's question earlier, another terrific topic to be explored. And I'm hoping that once Clately moved through the next round of treaty dialogue and treaty voting, that that might be a good time to move into that topic and work with them on that, if that's something that they might wish to do.
I just wanted to comment that I have researched Fort St. James a lot, and one of the things that I noticed in terms of resource extraction and initiatives of preserving history is that the First Nations history is purposefully erased, and it has been purposefully erased. Like one of the examples I have is the Diary of Fort St. James, which includes a whole lot of snippets of the history of the town and how the town was built on the resource extraction and forest industry. I think at the beginning of the book it basically explains and includes a very racist comment about First Nations, and also there was a lot of racist comments at the very beginning when Father Adrian Gabriel Maurice went to the area and called us like a whole bunch of really horrible names and lazy and things like that. But I know we have been a part of forestry, but it has been purposefully erased. And that's why we're not represented in these magazines. And it was a, it's when we're not represented, it just shows how times are changing, because we're in the media a lot and our histories are being rediscovered. So I know I think this research is really great, and I'm really happy that people are asking questions, because we have been involved, but most of these positions that we held were menial wage labor positions, because a lot of our people weren't allowed to gain the education and skills to obtain anything higher than that, because the residential school system only taught people how to become like farmers and laborers. It didn't really teach any academic skills. A lot of the Indigenous community can only read at a grade 3 level for the ones who went to some of the residential schools in the area. So, yet no, we're not very well represented, but it's because we were purposefully erased.
Thank you, Marion. That was a terrific observation. And it reminded me of the work that Jim McDonald, who has passed, who was a faculty member here, did with Kitsum-Kalem in rebuilding that erased history, because Kitsum-Kalem played an enormous role in the forest industry in their region out in Tsimshian territory. And so the opportunities for redressing erasure exist for us, and we are poised to take that up.
Other questions? Good. Horst, I've been looking at you all afternoon thinking, there's a man who's got a memory or two to share. All right.
Thank you. This is not a question, Greg. Some people in this room may remember a man by the name of Dr. George Clark, who came in the 70s to help us at Northwood to get the pulp mill producing. He was a highly regarded engineer, MIT grad, and he recognized what you describe in here, the ingenuity of this area. with only a railroad between here and Mount Robson and a telegraph of CN, all the engineering alone that was accomplished here. And he liked this area so much, he always had a canoe strapped on his car. When he could sneak away from the mill, he would just go up to Crooked River and catch a fish. But when he left here, he said, "Horst, you must record the history of this area." And he said, "You must interview people like Ivy Guest, who knows the area, who made a big contribution to the land bridge between the Arctic and Pacific watershed." I tried to keep him up over the years. He died 2 years ago at the age of 105. I tried to keep him up. I wish he could be here tonight, and he would pay you a big compliment.
That doesn't get you out of donating your papers to the archive. I'm going to keep that one.
Well, I'm glad you reminded me of this.
Yes.
Thank you, Horst. I know we've got a couple of authors here of the books. Any memories, any comments from any of the authors? No? Any other questions? Am I missing hands? Any memories or any thoughts or questions from other people, and maybe some of the authors that I know are in the room? Any other questions or any comments from some of the authors that are in the room? No? Okay. All right. I've hardly ever been accused of being too soft. So, Ramona, were you going to close it?
Okay. Thank you for everyone for coming today and helping us share the memories of Upper Fraser. Special thanks to Marlene for moderating, and thank you so much for Greg for all your support. We really appreciate it. And because this is the end of this series, I'd especially like to thank Dr. Jeff Payne. It was his idea in the first place to come up with this lecture series this year, and his support is truly appreciated. So thank you, everyone, and hope to see you again in the fall. Take care.